Okay, so today we're going to talk about the CURCA Student-Faculty Collaborative mini-grant proposals. I'm Dr. Aikman. I'm in the Department of Psychological Science, and I'm going to give kind of a general overview of CURCA and this funding source, and then we'll talk about some of the details that you need to include if you're going to apply for this funding source. All right, so starting off with just what CURCA is. CURCA is an office on campus that supports undergraduate research and creative initiatives across all of our campuses. And the main things that they do is find mentorship for both students and faculty for creative engagement and undergraduate research. Obviously funding for projects, recognition for people who are involved in undergraduate research and creative activities, and then help with publicizing and disseminating any research that you're doing. If you want more information about CURCA, you have the website here. So just a reminder, the Student Faculty Collaborative Mini Grant Proposals is a competitive grant. You can get up to $2,000 for research projects, and the application must be student-led. So this isn't a faculty project where they want a student to come in and work with them. It's a student who has a project they want to work with, and they find a faculty mentor who's willing to work with them on it. All right, so a frequently asked question about CURCA funding is trying to figure out if your project is appropriate for CURCA funding. And basically, if the project follows the definition of undergraduate research, then yes, it is totally appropriate for this type of funding. So the definition that CURCA uses, an inquiry or exploration conducted and disseminated by an undergraduate student that makes an intellectual or creative contribution to the discipline and to applied practice. So this is a pretty far-reaching definition, and there's a pretty good chance that whatever project you're thinking about, it would fall under here somewhere. Following up from that, another frequently asked question is whether or not CURCA only limits their funding to the sciences, and definitely not. CURCA is undergraduate research and creative activities. So funded projects can come from many different departments, not just from the sciences. All right, so some quick facts about the CURCA mini grant before we get into the specifics for how you should prepare your application. Keep in mind that you can ask for up to $2,000. And the money must be used for materials and or supplies. So this could be lab materials, cameras, computer software, chemicals, NTERC payments if you need to pay participants to take part in your research. Just one small note that any purchase that you make, it remains the property of UNG. So if you buy cameras or software equipment, it stays at UNG. If you're awarded the grant, you must spend down all of your funds by April 1st. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're planning your timeline when you're going to need things. Make sure you'll be able to spend that down by April 1st. The applications are due Friday, September 25th by 11:59 p.m. And we expect to make funding decisions by October 31st. All right, so a couple of other quick facts. Grantees, if they're awarded the grant, must work closely with their mentor. This is a project that's meant to pair students with faculty for mentorship. They must present their research at some type of conference, so the UNG Annual Research Conference, another CURCA-sponsored event, or a disciplinary conference or show by May 2020. So if you accept this award, you're agreeing to present your research. And you must also submit a post-award report that summarizes the outcomes and products of the funded project by May 1st, 2021. So just kind of a follow-up to show that you did the work that you said you were going to do with the money that you're granted. Okay, so the application overall must include a proposal narrative, and in a second we're going to talk about exactly what has to go into that. A budget, and we'll talk a little bit about what goes into there, a mentor support letter, and certifications. More details on all of that to follow. And before we get into those details, how your proposal would be ranked and rated. Once you turn in your application, there'll be a committee composed of faculty representatives from every school that then reviews them. They rank them using a rubric, and this is a really important point. Make sure you're looking at that rubric and writing your proposal to the rubric, and I'll be bringing that rubric in as we talk about the specifics, but it'll be a really useful guide for you for knowing exactly what to put into your application. The committee is going to provide a numerical score as well as qualitative comments, so you'll get feedback so that you can use that information formatively and change things as needed if you want to apply somewhere else or work on this project more. And the proposals with the highest scores are the ones that are funded. So with this idea that the committee is composed of faculty representatives from every school, make sure that you're writing your application in lay terms and for a general audience, because you can't be sure that the person who is reading your application will know specific terminology that you use in your field. So just make sure that it's written at a level that anybody could read it and understand it. So now let's get into the details. So the information that you need to make sure you include in your application. So overall, there's several sections that are going to be in the narrative portion of your application. You have aims and objectives, goals and expected products, methodology, significance, the impact on your career or your education, a timeline, and references. For the first parts, everything except for the references, you have 3 pages to express that information. So you have to be fairly concise. So we'll go over what that information should be so you can know what to put in and maybe what isn't as important to get in there. Your references do not count against your page limit, so they can be on a separate section. All right, so starting with the aims and objectives, the idea here is just to provide a description of your research project or your creative activity. So lay out step by step what your project would entail, what is it that you're actually going to do. Give some thought to why we should fund you. So why is this project important? How will the supplies and the money that you're given help you attain that goal of finishing your project? And again, since the proposals will be reviewed by a faculty committee with diverse backgrounds, it needs to be scholarly, but it needs to be accessible to anybody. So avoid using too technical of terms. Explain everything that you're going to do in a way that everybody can understand it. All right, so just to give you a little idea of what the rubric would look like when it is being reviewed. So to get an exceptional score for aims and objectives, you would need to make sure that your description is clear, concise, and easy to understand, and the proposed project contains original, innovative, or creative aspects. So just as you're writing it, keep that in mind to make sure you're getting full points on this section. For the goals and the expected products, what we're looking for here is a brief description of overarching goals and a description of your final product, which would be things like presentations at local, regional, or national conferences, giving some type of report to a community partner or a business partner, presenting at an exhibition, publishing, taking this on for a further grant proposal. Just what do you plan to do as an outcome for this? And again, there's a rubric associated with this, so you would need to make sure that you're clearly stating the goals of your product, making sure that you show the significance of the product and where it's going to end up. So just to give you an example, here you have some specific goals and then what would happen with the project when it's done. So goal 1, the first goal is to understand whether increased soldier production is a specific stress response to competition or a more generalized stress response to a range of environmental conditions. Goal 2, the second goal is to explore whether increased soldier production by the parasite affects the longevity of the destructive larval stage of its host. So this is a biology project and it clearly states out what it is that they're trying to find with the research they're doing. And then they go on to say that the product from this research will include a poster presentation for the North Georgia Research Conference and a presentation for the Georgia Academy of Science. Right? So they're giving a very clear outcome of what's going to happen. Okay, I'll pause for a second if there's any questions before I keep going. Good so far? Okay. Feel free to interrupt me at any time and then we'll leave room at the end for questions as well if you just want to hold on till the end. All right, so the next part of your narrative is methodology and background. So you would need to describe whatever procedures you're going to be using to accomplish your research project. Identify the tools and equipment necessary to accomplish that task where appropriate if you need tools to accomplish the task. You need to exhibit knowledge of acceptable and practical methodology and use peer-reviewed literature where applicable. So basically you need to make sure it's understood in your application that you know what's expected in your discipline and that you're following the appropriate protocols for your discipline. And then describe any work experiences or courses that have prepared you for success in this project. So what knowledge do you already have that will allow you to make sure that this project can be seen through to completion? So generally, make sure you're very concise. Make sure what you are asking for is reasonable and what you say you're going to do is reasonable. Make sure that you can actually accomplish the project that you're proposing within the time frame that you need, within the confines of what this project is asking for, so that you can present by the date that is required and submit your annual report at the time that it's required. Make sure you're keeping in mind what the standard is in your field. And if you're doing anything that is outside the norm, make sure you point out how it's outside the norm and why it's okay to do something that kind of goes against what's the norm in your field. And put it all in context of your goals. What do you hope to get out of this project, and how is what you're doing going to lead to that outcome? And again, just here at the bottom, what you see is the rubric that's associated with this part of the narrative. So make sure your proposed materials and methodology is clear and understandable. The project needs to reflect an understanding of current research in the field, and it needs to be clear how the proposed project is inspired by past research or creative activity. So situate it within your field and talk about how this is going to build on what's already part of your field. For the next section, the significance and rationale, you should discuss any other research or creative activity that inspired the project. So kind of where did this project begin? Where did the idea begin? And how does it fit in with what you already know? And fit it in with the broader field. So how is your project going to fit in with whatever field you happen to be in? And the main thing here you're trying to do is convince the reviewers why the research is important. Kind of this is what we already know in this topic, and here's how what I'm going to do is going to take it further. This is why it's important. This is why it's going to add to what's already known. So one way to do this is to make sure you're relating it to a broad audience. Make sure it's something that everybody who reads it could understand it and understand why it's important. You could think about it in terms of if you had to describe this project and why it mattered to somebody who had no background in your field, a family member who didn't know why you were doing this and had no background in either this scientific endeavor or this creative endeavor, could you convince them why it's an important project that should be funded? What is it that makes it interesting and exciting? So to give an example, here again is another biology example. So billions of dollars yearly are lost to pests or spent trying to control them, not only in Georgia and North America, but worldwide. So showing why it's an important problem, not just here, but more large scale. In Georgia, the value of plant crops in was approximately $36.5 million. In 2010, approximately 701 million. And plant crops were lost to disease, pests, or spent trying to control the pests. So you're showing very concretely why this matters. There's cost savings associated with it. So it matters on a broader scale, and it matters in terms of money. Again, this is just the rubric that would go along with that portion of the narrative. So the proposed activities fit clearly into the broader scholarly or creative field. Individual scholastic and personal experiences are tied directly to the project goals. The student appears to have the skills and knowledge needed to fulfill project goals. Others will attain benefit from the new knowledge, applications, or creative works produced through the project, and the impact extends beyond one particular field of study. So showing again why anyone should care about this project. And the next part of the narrative is describing the impact on you. So how is this funding going to benefit you in a bigger sense? So not just, yes, I can do this research if I get the money, but how doing this research project or this creative activity, how is that going to enable you to take the next step in your career or the next step in your education? So how is this going to help you go further in what you're trying to do? And another thing to include here would be your motivation. What got you interested in this product or this project? Why are you interested in it? What do you hope to do with it? The rubric associated with that, it is clear how the proposed activities fit into the student's career aspirations. students masterfully demonstrate their interest in the topic and the field, the proposed project will clearly impact the student's career and education. So just make sure you can demonstrate how it would be beneficial to you. All right, going on to the next part of the narrative would just be the timeline. So this needs to tell the reviewers the timeline for accomplishing your goals. So for instance, if you're doing a scientific project, your timeline for submitting an application for IRB review. So understanding that you have to get that ethical approval and that you know when you're going to submit it, and when you're going to start data collection, and when you're going to start data analysis, and when do you plan on writing up the project, and when are you going to present that project. So just showing that you know the steps that you'll have to take from beginning to end, and demonstrating that you could actually reasonably get that work done in the time frame for this grant funding. So just set out all the steps that have to happen and when they're going to happen. And the rubric there, timeline is suitable for and meets all the activities described. So just set out what has to happen and when it's going to happen in order for you to finish the project. Okay, then moving on from the narrative section to the budget. For the budget, you need to give a detailed list of all the supplies and materials that you want to buy with the grants that you're funded with. And the more specific you can be, the better. So include the item name, the vendor, the quantity that you need, the price, shipping estimates, total cost. Any information that you can provide will make the process go more smoothly. And included in there is the date needed so that it can be verified that that money can be spent on the products that you need by the time that that money needs to be spent. So just give some thought to when you're going to be buying those things. I recommend going to the CURCA website to look at the budget regulations and just make sure that you're not asking for anything that can't be funded through CURCA. In short, that means things like conference travel that cannot be funded, food or incentives, or any type of individual licenses for software, things like that. So just double check and make sure that you're not asking for anything that can't be paid for through CURCA. All right, the next thing you need will be a mentor support letter. So again, this is a student mentor funding opportunity. So you'll need to identify somebody who will mentor you through this project, and then they have to write a letter of support saying that they will in fact mentor you through this project. So this information here is more for the mentor as opposed to you, but so that you could give feedback to your mentor in terms of what they need to include in their letter. They need a brief explanation of their relationship to you. There needs to be information about the student's preparedness to complete the research. The mentor would have to have a statement of a plan to oversee the research, a statement that the student is the primary author of the application. It's perfectly appropriate to get feedback and help on the application, but it primarily needs to be your work. So it shouldn't be the mentor writing it and you signing off on it. It needs to be your product that they give feedback on, but your product. And then there needs to be a statement that the mentor will liaise with the CURCA office to purchase the materials and oversee their use. The students themselves will not be able to purchase the material. The faculty mentor will have to make arrangements with CURCA to make sure that happens. Okay, then the last thing that you're going to have to do in terms of the application that you do is a digital certification. And basically this is just by signing your name digitally when you submit your application, you are certifying certain things. So you'll be certifying that it's your own work. Again, it's okay to get feedback and guidance from your mentor, but it should be your own work that you're submitting. You're certifying that you're committed to presenting your research at either a CURCA conference or another local conference or national or regional conference. You are certifying that you're committed to submit that report of the accomplishments that came out of doing your grant. You are certifying that you understand there's a requirement of going to the IRB if you're doing human subjects research. So before any research takes place, you're certifying that you will submit your application to the IRB for ethical approval before you go forward. And you're certifying that you'll comply with any UNG and USG regulations. So that'll just be part of the process of signing your application when you turn it in. All right, so kind of just as a general summary, the best thing you can do is write the proposal to the scoring rubric. You can find it on InfoReady where the call for proposals was. It's there, pull it up while you're writing your application, and just make sure that you address every single point that's in that rubric to help ensure that your scores are as high as they can be on the rubric, since that's what we're using to rank them. Make sure you respect formatting guidelines. If you don't, your application will not be scored. So for instance, I mentioned earlier, you have 3 pages for your narrative. If you go over that, it won't be scored. So do please make sure you're reading what those requirements are and keeping to them. Write the proposal in easy to understand terms. You don't know who's going to be reading your application, so you can't assume that they will understand any technical terms that you're using. So make sure you explain everything in everyday terms. Give enough detail to show the seriousness of the project, making sure you show that I understand what goes into this project and I know how to make it happen. Be specific in your timeline. When are you going to start data collection? When will data collection be completed? When are you going to be writing up your project? When are you going to be presenting it? Make sure you're very specific in that information. And a sense of enthusiasm should come across, that you're excited about this work and that it's going to help you somehow in the future. And that leads to the last one. Explain how the experience will help you go on to the next step of your career or your education. So those are the most important things to convey in your application. All right, so that's it for what I had for the formal presentation. So I'm going to open it up for questions, but just also you can see here, there's the CURCA email address and my email address. So if you have questions after this presentation and you'd like to follow up with us later, feel free to either email me directly or the CURCA office and we'll get you feedback as soon as possible. All right, any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So when you were talking about the narrative, is it just exactly like 3 pages, nothing less, nothing more?
Nothing more.
Nothing more, okay. So we can have 3 pages or less.
Yes.
Okay, and then I never knew that CURCA was like expanded to other majors other than like science related majors. So like, let's say if like you're a business major, as long as you have like a creative, I guess, research idea, you could still apply for the grant.
It is not limited to any specific discipline. So yeah, you could apply no matter what your major is, what your discipline is, as long as you can show how this fits in with the CURCA definition of doing some type of creative activity or initiative or some type of research project. Yes, it can certainly apply. I mean, even more visual art type things, which you might not think of traditionally as research, but that could certainly lead to an exhibition and that could certainly lead to furthering your career. So creative activities like that are perfectly appropriate.
Oh, there's a question in the chat room.
Let's see, the question in the chat room, is it okay that students write the proposal based on what he is currently working on, a project with the faculty? Can't give a straight answer to that, but the general answer would be, if the student is the impetus for the project, if it's their research project, and this would be a way to further the research project, then yeah, you could say that this is a project that I'm working on. However, I would need further funds to be able to carry out this project. But if as a student you're working on a faculty's project and you want to just ask for funds to do the faculty's research project, that would not be appropriate. It has to be a student-led project. So if it's your project and the faculty mentor is helping you with it and now you would like to apply for some funds to help you continue on, that would be a different situation than I'm working with the faculty mentor and I want to get money for their project. Does that answer your question, clarify? Follow-ups to that? Yes, okay, thank you.
And are you able to apply for this grant as many times as you want? Like, is there a limit? Like, let's say you apply for the grant 1 year because of your project, then you get the grant. And if you have another project the following year, is it okay to continually apply?
As far as I understand it, yes. I don't think you can do multiple applications at the same time, but if you apply for a project 1 year and you get funding, you finish that project, and then the next year you would like to do another project, you could apply again. It would be a completely different application and a new review cycle, and it would be reviewed just as it was the previous year. But yeah, I don't think there's any limit to you reapplying. This is probably going to be a more direct question for Dr. Lynn. I know in the past with faculty mini grants, if they apply again, they have to be able to demonstrate success with their last one. So you may have to show, I got funding before and here's what I did with it. And I met the requirements and I was able to, do my presentation and write my post report. And if you are able to show support with the previous one, then that would be beneficial for the next one.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess that's it. I will go ahead and stop the recording.